All right, so now we're going to talk, after the first video, we're talking about why we trade. Now we're going to get into some of the negative consequences of what happens when trade is denied. Okay, barriers to trade. Barriers are political. They're not done for economic motives. They're done for political motives. All right, you put up a barrier for a reason. You put up a fence around your yard, not because you're neighborly, but because you want to keep them out or you want to keep yourself in. So these kind of actions are taken with politicians. And if you think about it, Congress, or the British Parliament, or the Japanese Diet, or Canadian Parliament, these people who are sitting there as the elected representatives of the people, most of them, if not all of them, I mean, nobody's an economist. I don't know of an economist who runs for Congress. But some business people, small business people, big business people, I mean, the president is a business person who deals in unreal estate, fancy office towers and things like that. But they have no economic clue. But what they are is they are representing an area of the country. Now, if you think about this, I'll just go through a list and I'll pause my own discussion here. Think about these areas of the country and think about what is economically important to those areas. So when I say Florida, particularly Central Florida, what comes into your head? All right. Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego, that area there. What is important there? Houston, Texas. What's important there? The Finger Lakes regions of New York. Idaho. Now, so if I keep making the list, you can kind of think, products or services that are big in those areas, you are going to protect them from threats, from outsiders. You have to, or you don't get reelected. If you're the governor, if you are the state assembly person, if you are the congressperson or the senator from that state, yeah, you're not going to get elected. So you protect those. And that's what we talk about. When we talk about barriers to trade, there's a general terminology that goes in here called protectionism. All right, this is, again, anytime you add ISM to anything, it becomes a politically charged statement. So protectionism has that political charge to it. Now, we'll talk about barriers to trade. So let me just share the screen here, okay? And we'll get back to, the ideas of barriers to trade. Again, being created. I mean, there are some natural barriers to trade. Obviously, sailing the ocean takes a bit of doing. And arranging transportation takes a bit of doing. All right, but we're talking about political barriers to trade here, putting up walls as opposed to building bridges. All right, so protectionism is a general concept, and again, you're trying to protect something. Now, in most cases, you are trying to protect domestic producers from foreign competition. You can't protect them from competition inside the country, all right, because that's not handled. The state governments, interstate commerce is handled by the federal government. That's part of the Constitution. But, we're talking about foreign competitors coming in. And you want to protect, because if you don't, they lose jobs, you lose your job. It's the politicians. There's only one party in power, and that's the incumbent, regardless of whether they're an R or D next to their name. But what is protectionism? Well, protectionism is, again, keeping industries running despite the competition. It's political. It has no economic justification. And retaliation is common. You throw up a barrier here, they throw up a barrier on the other side over there. And it goes back and forth. And there are a couple of instances here when you talk about barriers, for example, or trade embargoes. One story here is President George W. Bush, Bush 43, in the 2004 election cycle. In 2003, he started throwing tariffs up against Canadian plywood. He started throwing up tariffs against foreign steel that was made in South Korea, South Africa, China, because he wanted to protect domestic industries. Now, Bush barely won the 2000 election. That was the hanging Chad thing where, we didn't know who was really president until the middle of December when the Supreme Court finally ruled on that. But he decided to be a little proactive, especially in states that were considered swing states. So he started throwing up all these protectionist measures, large tariffs against imported steel. And what they really hurt? They really hurt the contractor. If I'm a contractor building a building, I really don't care where that steel comes from, as long as it's made to my specifications and I can get it at a good price so I can make a profit on this contract. Well, that's what happened. He puts it up there because he doesn't want to lose Michigan, Illinois, Florida. Well, you know what happened? The European Union, who was bitten by some of these tariffs, retaliated by throwing up a 100% tariff on orange juice. Now, orange juice, Florida. Oh, in 2003-4, who's the governor of Florida? It's one Jeb Bush. So, yeah, and here it is, steel versus oranges. These two things don't match up, but the retaliation, it's going to escalate. You know, you slap me, I punch you. You bring a knife, I bring a gun to the fight. You know, it's going to escalate. It's not going to stop. And it hurts the consumer. The European consumer gets hurt because they can't get orange juice at a decent price. And European businesses are hurt by the American tariff. They're just trying to sell steel. Oh, it's unfair. It's not unfair. It's competitive. So we have to understand that retaliation comes, it's not measured, and it's going to escalate, and it's going to hit in areas that weren't part of the fight in the first place. So that's what you have there. All right, so let's talk about specifically a couple of things that can happen here. And that is, you can outright embargo a product from a country. We embargo everything from Cuba. That goes to 1960. The Eisenhower administration signed that embargo, and it's been renewed by every president since. No Cuban sugar, no Cuban tobacco, nothing. That's pure political. It's pure hatred for Castro and the communist regime for what they did. Now, again, you can pick and choose an embargo against anything, anyone, any country. Oh, we don't like you. We don't like your politics. We don't like the fact that your country is essentially a sweatshop. Right? Quotas. You can artificially restrict the flow of goods in. You will look like, well, we're allowing some of this competition, but just not a lot. And so you could tolerate a little bit of competition on foreign cars, for example, and then throwing up higher tariffs. Higher tariffs here, only hurt the consumer. Whether it be a business person trying to get that steel to finish a building, or whether it's not the coffee that you were drinking at Starbucks and them having to charge an extra 50 cents or 70 cents per cup just because of a high tariff. Now, all this is designed to make political statements or to protect domestic industries. But if those domestic industries are dinosaurs, that meteorite is hit. It's called capitalism. And dinosaurs must die. They either adapt, improvise, overcome, or they die. That's a pure economic point of view. It's not a moral point of view. It's not, dog eat dog competition, social Darwinism. This is economic reality. If there's a pizza shop in every strip center in East Brunswick, they better find enough customers or they will go out of business. Or they must produce a good product at a good price or they will go out of business. But we don't mourn for them when they do unless you're the one running it or you're the one employed there. But if we protected all pizza shops, well, no, maybe there's a reason why that pizza shop should go out of business. They don't make good pizza. Well, away we go. All right, next. Let's jump to the next slide, which is called dumping. Dumping is a tactic that has issues and retaliations on it. And usually a country that gets burned like this, when they've been dumped on, will turn around and then throw up like a huge amount of walls around themselves. And the classic example is we're going to talk about here is the Japanese with televisions. And that took place in the early 1970s. So they were trying to enter a new market. Japanese were constantly innovating TVs. They had produced better quality TVs at this point in time. And they were trying to get into the American market. All right, so what they did was they conspired together. Now in Japan, there's no antitrust laws. So they can do this. They can all get together and say, look, we'll divide up territory and turf so that we're not competing against each other. So Sony, you get the New York metro area. Sanyo, you get Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington. Hitachi, you get the San Francisco Bay Area, And what they did was they produced a product and cut costs as best they could and sold them probably at cost or below cost even in some cases, just to get their foot in the door. Now the American products were more expensive. They were pieces of furniture. They weren't exactly television sets. They were huge pieces of furniture. And they had a poor reputation for quality. One of the things that always came up in this time period was that if you bought a major appliance like a television set, the salesperson would immediately ask you, do you want to buy the extended service warranty with this? And my dad always did, because you take it home and a month later, it'd break down. 2 months later, a year later, the new television, the picture tube went out. Japanese would just make televisions that were better quality. You didn't need to do that. So this is considered dumping because they're putting the television into a market and they're selling it below cost. They're selling it at below market value. And that's, to get their foot in the door, because the idea is to get their foot in the door, and then by doing that, help to eliminate some of those American dinosaurs. Now, see, again, this is the flip side here. Somebody could look at this and say it's good. Throwing that competition in there forced American television companies out of business because they were producing crap televisions. Since they don't want to produce good ones, they die. Dinosaurs must die. Boom, they die. Okay. But that hurts local businesses, because again, GDP is measured by what you produce, not what you sell. So if that television set is made in Japan, Japan gets it on their GDP. Yeah, we get the sale here, and that salesman might get a commission, but it's not GDP. It's not, the major factory is over in Japan. So you're trying to put the locals out, and that way, when you do kill off the dinosaurs here, or the inefficient enterprises, you're standing there going, look, we're the only TVs left. And, if the government responds to it quickly, then they could take measures to limit the number of TVs coming in. But, the American government failed to do that. I mean, we were paralyzed in the 1970s with the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. And by the time we figured it out, the Japanese were beating us in electronics. They're beating us in cars. After the first oil shock, when Detroit-made cars were getting like 10 miles per gallon, the Japanese were getting 20. And gasoline prices have gone from 25 cents a gallon to $1. So, that's a problem. All right, so that's a problem here. And again, the response is more telling than the actual act. The response would be massive walls. So dumping is not the actual process by which a trade barrier is erected. It is the circumstance by which a trade barrier will be erected. And then we come to this third example, which is a more modern and contemporary example, and that is resource nationalism. What would happen if your government, if you had some kind of resource that you either drilled, mined, farmed, created here in this country, but your government said, no, you can't sell it to anybody unless we say so. Our friends get this. So that's the example here in the white box with Russia. Russia has enormous oil and natural gas resources. Well, the Soviet Union did not sell a lot of oil and natural gas to the West. They managed to do some, but their main purpose was to send it to their friends in the Eastern Europe bloc, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, those countries, and then sell a few things to the West just to make some hard currency so they could buy some stuff. But it's not entering the market. Those, even to this day with Putin, most of the oil and natural gas is heading to China. And, excuse me, that's not helping the marketplace in a general sense, because nobody's bidding on it. Yes, it does take that need that the Chinese have for 4 or 5 million barrels per day of oil, and it's satisfied by the Russians, but that oil could have been sold to Korean companies or to Japanese companies or to the Americans, even if it was really low priced. So they're denying the ability of that good or service or raw material to get out to the market. Now, the other one is a more pernicious example. I mean, this is really vicious. You have a private Chinese company with ties, obviously, to the Chinese government. They are involved in Australia in mining. The central part of it. You got to understand, Australia, there's only a little bit of population around the rim, and the interior is pretty empty. But that's also where they have a lot of resources, particularly rare earths. You also get a lot of that in Eastern and Southern Africa. But these Chinese companies are mining rare earths like vanadium, okay, which is useful in scientific equipment. And they're not selling it to anybody. They are forced to sell it back to the Chinese government or to military scientific contractors for the Chinese government. so that they can use it. American companies can't buy this stuff from the Chinese miners, even though it's in Australia, that they're mining it. The Australian government doesn't say anything about this. The Chinese government is leaning on a Chinese company to say, no, you can't sell it to the Americans. They did it about a decade ago with rice too. The world's rice markets went crazy because there wasn't a very good crop, but apparently China did grow a substantial amount of rice one year, and instead of selling it on the open market, they kept it for themselves. They made the companies kind of keep it internally rather than get these companies rich by selling it to the open market and kind of drawing that out. Even on the next year, who knows, next year might be a bad crop, and the Chinese market is the Chinese companies are still selling overseas. Like, no, you're gonna feed our people first. You're not gonna sell it overseas. So you've got some meddling here by the government on several different levels. You've got the circumstance by which you create a problem such as dumping. You have circumstances that are pure competition. Companies or countries make better products than us, and we get our dander up. We get offended, and oh my God, we have to throw up a wall here. Well, how about if you're an athlete and somebody runs a race better than you, swims a better 100 butterfly better than you, what are you gonna do? You're gonna tell your coach, ban that team from ever playing against us again, because I don't want to see them again because they're better than me. No, you pick up your own act and you become a better swimmer, better runner. You don't avoid competition, you welcome it. But this is the problem. All right, we talked about tariffs in this. So what I'm going to link up to, you're going to go to the assignment page next for this. And the assignment page is going to take you to the rather voluminous harmonized tariff schedule for the United States. It's over 3,000 pages long, so it will take a while to load the link when you come up. But I want you to go through the index, and I want you to pick a category of goods that you have an interest in. All right, something that you have an interest in. If it's agricultural, like coffee beans, or if it's something electronics or whatever, find it and look at the differences as to the tariff rate, as well as the countries at which that get that kind of favored status, most favored nation status, or not. And then look at where it's coming from, the countries of origin. Look at all the different little combinations of it, and then respond to the prompt in the assignment page. All right, so you can take a look at one category, and then you're going to, kind of look at the tariff schedule, and then kind of go back in and make some comments about it in the assignment page. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. Again, if you have any FAQ type questions, put them on the FAQ page for Chapter 5.